computer button. Okay, shall we go ahead and
let's do it. Let's do it. Welcome, everyone. Good evening. Thank you for joining us. We are so excited to have you here tonight. My name is Kristen Kohler. I'm president of the Reading League California, and we are excited to be a newly formed chapter. In fact, this is only our second event, so we're super excited to have you here with us tonight. Before we begin, I want to encourage you to follow us on social media and check out our website. The website's listed here on the screen. And when you go there, you will find the links to our social media. You can join as a member and you can subscribe to our events calendar on the website so that you'll get notified every time we host an event. We have one event per month all the way out until May, and we're likely to add more. So try to connect through that event calendar so you don't miss a thing. We are an all-volunteer nonprofit organization run by educators, administrators, and passionate literacy experts from all over California. Any donations or membership dues go right back into our organization so that we can continue to bring you free, high-quality content like tonight's, and to increase the knowledge about the science of reading throughout the state. So we hope you will join us in meeting this mission. Speaking of mission, let's see if I can advance my own slides. There we go. This is our mission to promote awareness, understanding, and use of evidence-aligned literacy instruction in California based on reading science. You can join us by using that QR code or that bit.ly. And we just wanted to let you know what Leslie already said. We're going to record tonight. We're going to send it to registrants, and we're going to post it on our YouTube channel as well. Dr. Blackwell will take questions at the end of the presentation, so drop those in the chat, and Leslie and I will collect them. And I'll turn it over to Leslie Zoroya, our Vice President and Director of Events, to introduce Dr. Blackwell.
Are you not going to do the next slide?
Oh, I forgot. Let's see. Let's hear. Oh, our vision, a lot of words here, but we'll capture it for the recording. Our vision is, simply to help and expand this information across the state and in a lot of different ways. Universities, teachers, mission partners, and other organizations. So stay tuned for more at the end.
All right. Now I'm so excited I'm the one who gets to introduce Shelley tonight, and I'm excited because I met her almost exactly a year ago at the Reading League conference in New York, and I attended her presentation of what she's going to do tonight, and I hightailed it over to her and said, oh my gosh, I loved this. This is so great. We have to connect. And so we did a podcast together, and she agreed to come, even though it's late in Kansas right now, and speak with us tonight. So let me tell you just a little bit about her. So she's an MTSS literacy support specialist for is it Olathe? Am I saying it right?
Oh, yes, Olathe.
Olathe Public School.
Does not follow syllable rules.
Okay. I'm like, okay, because I look at everything differently now that I know the syllable types.
I know, right?
Yeah. And so she's from Olathe, Kansas, and she works with teachers supporting all levels of the MTSS framework for literacy instruction. Prior to this, she spent 22 years as a school-based speech language pathologist with a focus on language-based literacy remediation. Shelley has given national, state, and local presentations in the MTSS process and the science of reading. She's a local letters facilitator. She's been a guest on multiple podcasts, including ours, and is a guest lecturer for SLP literacy graduate courses at the University of Kansas Medical Center. And Shelley also continues to do research and develop evidence-based spelling and decoding interventions for classroom use at Tier 2 and Tier 3 levels. So we're super excited to have you here with us today, Dr. Blackwell, and we're excited to hear what you're going to say about how spelling informs reading instruction, because it's a hot topic.
It is. Thank you so much for having me. I'm going to, while I get going here, I'm going to share my screen.
Please.
Here, get some slides up. So I am in Kansas, and it is 8:30 in my time, but I was thinking, these evening things are so impressive that educators teach all day, work all day, and come and learn. But those of you that are east of me, I'm even more impressed with you. It's even later there than it is here.
Yeah, we got some New Jersey people here.
Nova Scotia. I saw Nova Scotia.
Ontario,
anyway, it's
Chicago.
pretty cool. Yeah.
Yeah.
So thanks to everybody for being here. I love having conversations about literacy, and spelling just really kind of became one of my passions. Spelling and morphology are really my things aside from decoding, because when I was doing my work as an SLP, I had teachers coming to me more about spelling. We did our work with decoding, and we were doing science of reading way back. But they'd come and say, okay, so my student can read, but they can't spell. What do I do? What's happening? Why? And so I just started getting very curious about it, and that started my journey down the orthography side of this and the spelling side of the literacy piece. So a couple things on this slide. My email is here, my social is here, and then that QR code is also my contact information. So feel free to reach out anytime. I love to have conversations. I love to answer questions and be a thought partner. If you've got some situations where you're like, all right, what? I have teachers reach out all the time and say, okay, I have these student errors and I think this is what it means, but could you take a second look? And happy to do it. Like, that's what this is all about, and this community that we are building within all the literacy. So please, anytime, reach out. So today we're going to talk about a few things. We're going to talk about, obviously, the cognitive processes associated with spelling. We've spent a lot of our time in our professional learning and our personal learning on how the brain learns to read. Science of reading is really focused on that decoding piece. We're just now starting to get into some other of those layers, like spelling and morphology and writing. And so those pieces are coming along. So we'll talk about the spelling side of how the reading brain works. Then the other piece I really want to get into is, okay, so that's the theory, but what's the what? Like, what do I do with it? How do I figure out where to even start my instruction? So we'll look at how we analyze some spelling errors and some methods to do that. And then if you come to one of my sessions, I always want to send you with something tangible that you can print, do tomorrow, not just the knowledge. We've got to build the knowledge, but there's also that practical piece to implement. So I'll share some resources with you about some spelling interventions. The other piece about my sessions is I always bring the rope back, and we did a session with administrators and threw the slide up there, and they were like, oh, moans and groans from the administrators. So we said, if you can name all the strands, we'll skip the slide. And it was like crickets, because they couldn't do it. So I said, we're going to do this. But I just always like to come back to this. And the more we hear things, the more, we learn it, but we also see it through a different lens. So we're going to spend just a second on this. I think about that bottom part of the rope as a set of finite skills, right? Once we learn it, we own it. It's ours. Once you learn how to ride a bike, you can get back on a bike and ride it 20 years later. That's the same thing with spelling and decoding. Once I learn when to use CK or when to use K, I got it. It's mine. The top part is more of those infinite skills, and we are never done learning those. We are never at capacity of, I've got all the vocabulary in English, I'm done. So I like to bring teachers back to this because when we're on the bottom part of the rope, we have to use systematic, explicit instruction, and we have to follow step by step how the brain learns. The top part of the rope, we have a lot more freedom with how we instruct. That art of teaching can really come in. So when we're talking about decoding and spelling instruction, we're at the bottom part of the rope, and it has to be done a certain way versus when we're doing vocabulary and things, we have a lot more choice. So it's my little plug for Scaroborough's rope. Okay, so what is spelling anyway? What is this actually? I learned growing up, here was my list. I would take it home and I would memorize it. And then I would come back on Friday and take my test and do my 2 dictation sentences and hope magically I learned it. That's how it's been happening in our district, at least in Kansas, for up until 2 years ago. That's how we taught spelling. But really, what is spelling? The other piece that I noticed with teachers was when the day got busy, or we had an assembly, or we had things and something had to leave our instructional day, we skipped spelling. Spelling got thrown out the window. And really, spelling to me is the most powerful piece that can guide my instruction. Spelling, as I say, is the window to your literacy soul. Because when I look at a connected writing sample, I can tell how's your phonological system? How's your orthographic system? How's your morphological system? Not to mention, what about your grammar and your syntax and all of those pieces? There's so much that comes in a writing sample. And so that's where we're going to dive into as far as looking at your interventions and your instruction for supporting spellers who struggle. So orthography is just the speech to print translation process. If we think about the morphemes in orthography, ortho means correct or right. Graph means something written down. And so it's really the right way that we represent the speech sounds into print. And when we are spelling, we're just doing that translation. When we read, we're recognizing those words, but spelling takes a little bit more. I like this quote too that talks about how we have to actually analyze the word. We can't just see a word and learn it. We have to analyze it. And you'll see when we get into the actual instruction of spelling, that's what it takes. We are analyzing words. And when we analyze it several times, our brain makes this model. It gets imprinted. And so once we get that word into our brain and we've mapped it, it's there. It jumps right into our sight word vocabulary, meaning those are the words that we can access easily, automatically, whether you want to or not. If I put Lion on the board and said, don't read that word, your brain has already read it. Most likely that word is in your sight word vocabulary because you've analyzed it, you've made a neural model, it is stored there, and you can immediately retrieve that word. And that's the goal of all of this, the decoding side and the encoding or the spelling side. So English, you might hear people say English is just crazy. It's unfair. In fact, there's an article on there out there about English is chaotic, but it's not. Because we really have some sense and order to our English language. Yes, we are a melting pot of lots of languages, but as we start to learn the patterns, because we've analyzed the words, we can start to make some connections and make sense of it. So Reading Rockets talks about these components that words' meaning and their part of speech can determine their spelling. For instance, what part of speech I'm going to use or what ending, like suffix I'm going to use is determined by what the root word is. So the meaning, the part of speech, that contributes to why we spell things the way we do. Letters and combinations, we know we don't use certain combinations of letters like C, P, T to say a sound. That's not part of English. The spelling of in the position of the word has a factor too. And that's where some of our students get tripped up with some of these spelling rules, like the sound J. Well, at the beginning, we can use J or G if it's followed by E or I or Y. But at the end, we never use J. We never use JE. We use DGE or GE. So there's the position of the word can affect the spelling that we'll choose. I referenced this earlier, the language of origin, the etymology, the history can explain the spelling. Think about the word chef. It's a French word. We use CH to spell that sh sound. But in English, we're supposed to spell sh with SH. But because the etymology of this is French, we know French represent that sh sound with CH. So as we start to analyze the words and we start to look at where that word comes from, it can help us with knowing how to spell those sounds. And then, of course, we have some letter sequences we know will happen, like QU always has to be QU to say qu. We'll never use UQ, things like that. So all of these are little factors in our spelling, which is why it makes it difficult. But we know that spelling skills are really tightly linked to the process of reading acquisition, right? It's kind of like the yin and yang, like we can decoding happens, but it's really closely linked to spelling. We focused a lot on the decoding and we really need to spend some more attention on the spelling too. I didn't realize how much I used my hands until I saw myself on the Zoom video. So hopefully some of you can relate too. It's your hand talkers. But what the research tells us is the more students understand about the structure of words, whether it's the spelling of it, the morphology of it, the more efficient their reading will be. So you've got kids who can read, can't spell. Do you have kids who can spell but can't read? I would probably say no. It would be a rare piece. But those two things work closely together. And this is something that was an aha moment for me as I learned it. Spelling is harder than decoding because it requires more cognitive work with it. You have to produce something when you spell it. When you read it, your brain is just recognizing it. I said this in New York. I liken it to when I see somebody I recognize their face and I think, oh, I know you. That's what reading is. I recognize it. I can see it. I read it. But the spelling piece of it, my analogy is I know your face, but I cannot come up with your name. I have to recall and produce your name. That's harder than just recognizing somebody's face. The same is true for reading and spelling. Recognizing a word, the receptive part, is a lot easier than producing the spelling of it, the expressive part. When I'm producing the spelling, now I have to take into account that whole last slide. What position is the word, the sound in that word? Do I use this spelling or that spelling? Is there an etymological? Is there a part that has to do with its etymology that may make me choose a different letter combination to spell that stuff? There's a whole lot more to do. So spelling is harder. You'll notice too, letters has a really nice scope and sequence of decoding and spelling. Decoding happens first and then spelling. So I've also heard teachers talk to me about, well, we've taught this skill and they can read this skill. They can do long vowel silent E, but they cannot spell it. That happens after. So if they're decoding it, yay, they're on their way. Now we got to build in some of that instruction for the spelling piece because it's coming along too. Okay, so let's get into how the reading brain learns to spell. Before we actually get in here, I say we're getting in, we're going to stop for a second. I love this podcast that Angie Hanlon did. You may have heard it. She was on Melissa and Lori Love Literacy. And she was a principal in Missouri. She's now a superintendent, and I think it's in Wisconsin. But she got to her building and she looked at data. 13% of her students were proficient with literacy. 13%. And so she, of course, met with their team and decided what are we going to do for this? And they implemented quite a few things like professional learning communities, data-driven decisions and discussions, those 4 questions for PLCs, and all of those things, the MTSS process. But she said the thing that she thinks made the biggest difference was increasing repetitions during instruction. They looked at their tier 1 lesson and said, how many repetitions are built into this? If there's like 5, how are we going to get 10? What can we do to increase those repetitions? We know vocabulary, I believe it takes 12 exposures to learn a vocabulary word, repetitions. So the same is true for learning the code, for decoding, for spelling. And so she shared this, that the gifted learner, it usually takes 1 to 4 repetitions for them to learn something. And I think we can all relate to every single one of these categories. There are things that I can hear once or twice and I'm gifted in that area. Now take me out to the golf course. It's going to take me a whole lot longer than 1 to 4 repetitions because that's not an area of strength for me. But so I think we can all be in all these categories and our students can be too. So you're dealing with that with your students as well. Like what do you need? How many more repetitions do you need? Typical learner, they need 4 to 14-ish. Struggling learners, 14 to 40. These are going to be your kids who probably aren't on an IEP, who, if you have title reading services or supports like that in your building, these are probably some of those where those kids fall. But those kids with learning disabilities, kids with dyslexia, need 40 to 200 repetitions. That's a lot of repetitions for students who are struggling to either learn how to decode or learn how to spell. And so her challenge to them was, how are you going to incorporate more repetitions? And so I bring this up because as you are doing your instruction, sometimes it feels like I have taught this skill over and over and over. I've taught it. Why aren't they getting it? Maybe they just need more repetitions. Maybe they're in that bottom category or that third category for this particular skill. Maybe not for another skill, but before you give up on the intervention or the support, consider that. How many repetitions have I provided? How can I incorporate more repetitions either in my tier 1, my core instruction, or in my interventions at tier 2 and tier 3? She ended up having 100% of her students were proficient in literacy by the time they were done, which was pretty amazing. So I think there's some merit to this. Okay, so let's look at the brain. So when we think about the reading brain, we know we have the phonological processor at the front part of our brain, and that's where we hear the sounds and words. That's where we detect, we segment sounds. That's kind of the sound base, right? And the back part of our brain is the orthographic processor. This is our letter box. We store what the letters look like. We store maybe the sound and symbol together with that. That's where we access our letters, the representation for the print. That green part here is kind of the bridge. And there's this highway here that goes from the phonological processor to the orthographic processor, and it rides right through this green part. This is where you think about the phonics. I'm connecting the speech to print. I'm connecting my speech with my graphemes and my representation based on the morphemes in that word, the position of the sound in that word. This is where I'm doing all that hard thinking, the phonics piece of it, the rules. And so the more we can do these repetitions in practice, the smoother this can be. Carol Tolman actually talked about how this is like a superhighway, and kind of made me think of California traffic, because we go out there every summer and we visit family. And so we've been in California traffic, and it can kind of get clogged up, right? And so we need to make sure we're unclogging that. We need to make sure that we are providing repetitions. We are making this so that we are connecting our sound with our symbols and the phonics rule as much as we can. This part here is the context and meaning processor, and it helps with our semantics, but it's also where we store our morphemes, our morphological knowledge. And so just like in reading, we tap into all of these things. We also need to tap into those for spelling, which makes sense, right? Decoding and spelling and encoding are kind of like cousins. They go together. So we're going to look at them similarly. Let's talk about this before we get into a little bit more of the instructional practice. So I love this quote, that spelling is a thinking process. It is not a rote memorization task. And this is where our instruction is having to shift, because we all grew up with the memorization. We've probably all taught teaching them how to memorize those words. But spelling is really a word study. It's really going into that word and analyzing the sounds, the letters, the graphemes, and then what all those little components of the phonics. So your brain, we want it to automatically do these things, but I don't know if you've actually thought about what your brain does when you spell. So let's say I give you the word kicked. She kicked the ball down the street. Spell kicked. We could all go Kicked, but your brain did these things all like that. It says the sounds k, I, k, t. Got 4 sounds I have to represent. But then the orthographic processor is going, and the phonics part, the angular gyres, those pieces are going, okay, so I hear that first sound k. Now I could spell it with a K, I could spell it with a C, and I know what those look like, orthographic processor. But in your phonics part, you're going, now wait a minute, it's the sound k at the beginning of the word. So could I use a CK there? Because CK can also spell k. No, it can't, because we don't start words with CK. Could I start it with a C? C can say k. Okay, wait a minute though. The next letter is an I, and I know when I have the letter C, if it's followed by an E, I, or Y, it's going to make this sound and not the k sound. So I can't use C, that leaves me K. Your brain did all of that instantaneously because you already have analyzed it and learned it. Likewise, at the end of the word, how many of you seen students spell the regular past tense with a T or a D? They're thinking, I hear the sound T, I'm going to spell it with a T, which pops us over to this part of our brain, that meaning part, going, hold on. Yes, T can be spelled T, but in this word, kicked, kick is an action. And if that action's already happened, I would put that regular past tense. And I know I need to spell regular past tense with an ED. And oh yeah, ED can say T if it's followed by a voiceless sound. It can say D if it's followed by a voice sound, or it can say id if it's followed by a T or a D. Your brain does all of that all at once. That's the goal. But a lot of our kids aren't doing this. And so then as the instructor, you're thinking, all right, well, how do I help them? How do I get them to go from K-I-K-T, for instance, to the correct spelling? That's where we're going with this. But again, it's a thinking process. We have to think through all of those pieces and see where the hiccup is. So this is what I'm sharing with you is what I've done in my school district. Like I said, we just really have moved over to structured literacy. This is our 3rd year. And last year we started a new spelling process. So this is a spelling process that our district uses. And again, we're calling it word study instead of spelling, because I really want to emphasize with teachers and students and parents that we're studying the makeup of this word. So step 1, it's Monday. I'm doing my pre-test, which I'll show you my version of that verbiage for that. I'm going to say the word in a sentence. So let's say I do the word plane. I'm going to say, we flew in a plane on our trip to California. I've activated the meaning processor, so I know which one I'm using. Plane, the airplane versus plain, like I just want plain vanilla ice cream, don't put any hot fudge on it, which is, by the way, not my preference. Step 2, students are going to say the word with the teacher and finger stretch the sounds together. So I've used it in a sentence. I'm going to say the word is plane. Students, finger stretch with me. Say p, ul, a, n. So we've just engaged this part of our brain, the phonological processor. I've heard the sounds, I've segmented them, and I've said them. The next step is then I'm going to have the students map those sounds onto their sound spelling paper. We like to use sound boxes for our first introduction, because then we're also teaching them that, getting that orthographic mapping. Here's the sound, here's the spelling. It might be 5 letters, it might be 1 letter, but we're getting that practice. I want students to do it first because I use this pre-test for my instructional knowledge. It helps me know, do students have that letter sound correspondence? Do they have that like sh is SH, or are they splitting those up? That's information for me. Also, are they leaving sounds out? Are they adding sounds? So again, all of this, and we're going to get into that a little bit more here. All of that's information for me. So they map those words out. And then as the teacher, this is my teaching part. I'm going to activate this phonics part of the brain, and I'm going to show them the correct spelling. And I'm also going to teach them that phonics pattern. So I'm engaging all of that at the same time. I'm looking at my clock and I don't want to run out of time for the good stuff. So I'm going to keep going. But again, questions at the end, whatever, email me. This is what we wrote for our teachers. And so we use 95% group for our direct phonics, our core phonics. And so we've lined up these lessons like this lesson 5 with spelling pattern from our core phonics. We are calling, instead of a pretest, introduction word list, because we're introducing the pattern. We're introducing this phonics rule and this word study with them. The spelling application word list is what we use for, I don't know my order of arrows, so I'm just going to put them all up there for now. We use the spelling application word list as our test. We're looking, can you apply the phonics rule in spelling these words? So we're trying to change some verbiage with our teachers and our parents and our students. But what this is our introduction word list follows the pattern. which is listed over here. And then the spelling application word lists are different words because we don't want them just to memorize. We want them to learn the pattern. There's some high frequency words in here as well. There's some sentence dictation if you want to do that. And then the other piece that is embedded in our sentence dictation are review patterns from our previous weeks. And so each week, like we'll do a review of 5 weeks. And so our core lesson 8, we would drop off lesson 2. I'm telling you this because I've put in all of our word lists for first grade through 5th grade in the resources I'm going to share with you. So I wanted to explain the format. So if it's something you want to use. We wrote it. It's not copyrighted. We're happy to share it. So that's what I want to share with you. So that's kind of how our teachers are teaching their word study. They've got some home lists that I'd be happy to share with you as well. And I've got a parent video that teaches parents about this as well. So if you want any of that, let me know. Okay, investigate spelling errors. They are a window to your students' foundational literacy abilities. We have to get in there. So let's think about this. A student spells the word slime, S-L-I-M. So your brain needs to start thinking about this analytical lens. Is there a problem with their phonology? Is this where the breakdown is? Does that, in other words, are they leaving out sounds? Are they adding sounds? Are they mixing up sounds? Is that where the problem is? Or is it an orthography error? Are they misrepresenting the spelling for those sounds? And that can go into here too, the phonics or the orthography. So are they spelling it with letters that don't make sense? Well, they could make sense if it's like OU or OW, multiple ways to spell it. Or is there a morphology piece with it? Like, did they spell ED with a T? So I'm just real quick in the chat, if you would put in a P, an O, or an M, if you think that this is a phonological error, write a P. If you think they're messing up the sounds, if you think it's an orthographic error, put in an O, or if you think it's a morphological error, put in an M. And Leslie, you may have to kind of give me a summary because I can't see the chat. What most people are saying.
Okay, most people are saying that it's an O, and some people are saying it's a P.
Okay, if we were in person, I would ask you about why you thought what you thought. But since we're not, we're going to talk through it. It could be a P if the student said slim. If they were spelling it slim, then you know that they aren't hearing the sound correctly. Because my word is slime, they're messing up the vowel. Probably though, this is an orthographic error because that vowel sound is I, long I. I need to see some spelling that represents the long I sound. I by itself in the middle of a closed syllable is not that. So that to me is telling me I've got some work here to do with orthography. Let's look at this one. Again, what do you think it is? Put it in the chat. The word is clip and they spell it K-I-P. And it could be more than one.
Most people are saying P.
Definitely a P. We've forgotten that L. We've missed a sound. So this word has 4 sounds and they wrote 3. So definitely a P. Could this also be an O?
Yeah, some people are writing O and P.
Yeah. So for me, I'm always going to start with the sound error. If I have students who are struggling with the phonological piece of this, it doesn't matter if I have to get that down because if they can't hear the sounds, they can't spell them. So I would be working on, okay, let's make sure we can finger stretch this. Let's do it together, do a few we do's, get those repetitions in so that I'm hearing them say all those sounds. Once they've heard the sounds, now let's see if they can spell it. The K and the C is that's another topic. We'll get there.
Okay.
We don't have time. Okay, what about this one? House, they spell it H-O-U-S. What do you think?
We're seeing lots of O's. All O's.
Okay. That makes
one M.
but I'm going to say the M. So kudos to the M.
We got a couple people who said M.
Here's why, because house, there's two parts. House is a morpheme all by itself.
Mhm.
So I need to have that E with it because that's how I spell that morpheme. But also S by itself indicates regular plural. So if I just put, oops, just don't look. If I just put HOUS, if I take the S off, now I'm saying I have more than one HOU. What is an HOU? So S by itself without that E shows me plural. So they don't quite have the understanding of the morphology of when to use S by itself for plural and when not to. So it could also be, I guess, maybe, with the SE rule, but think the morphology is a little bit harder to identify because we're still building our knowledge on morphology as teachers. But here's what this whole thing is about, is analyzing the student's errors, thinking about it, because there's a whole lot right about this spelling. They've got the ow, and they use the correct ow spelling, and they hear a s. There's a whole lot right about this. We just have a little extra to work on. So instead of thinking about words as right or wrong, let's think about what's their hiccup. And that's what this POM process, this POM process goes through. Okay, for time's sake, I'm gonna skip ahead, plus we already saw that. Let's do the last one, grows. They spell it GROSE.
We're getting M's and O's.
Okay.
M's and O's. A mix.
So my first piece of this would be, like, the one that stands out to me is the morphology. Because again, they aren't realizing that is being tacked on to show me third person verb. I'm losing my words here. From grow to grows, we add that s. We don't change the vowel spelling. So I want to make sure they understand that I can say, I grow, she grows, how I have to add that verb marker. It could be orthography because they used OE instead of OW, but my first line of instruction is going to be like the bigger content piece of it. And in this case, it's the morphology. So what does this look like in real life? This is a 5th grade sample. She writes a lot, but she's got a lot of spelling errors. And so it's kind of well, my gosh, where do you start? Where do you start with all this? So I do the POM spelling analysis, and this template is also in the resources that I'll give you. I start by highlighting the words that are errors. And if I don't get them all, I don't get them all, but I'm going to get most of them. And so then I write down over here how the student spelled it, and then what the correct spelling is. And you can kind of go through some of these. So as you look at and you compare, you're going to use that analytical lens and decide, let's see, was that a phonological error? She spelled it S-E-L, S-E-L. Did she hear all the sounds in the right order? Sure did. Not a phonological error in her spelling. But, we've got some orthographic errors. 1, she didn't use the floss rule. And 2, maybe she was thinking, could she have been thinking sell, like I'm going to go sell something, or cell phone? She didn't know the difference between that, but there's definitely some orthography here. And if you look through, most of her errors are orthographic. There are a couple that are both. Like here, highest, she spelled the S with an I-S-T, which tells me she doesn't understand comparative and superlative. So I need to teach her those endings and help her understand, if I'm comparing something, like that was the highest building, I'm comparing it to something else, and therefore I use EST. I'm also getting some grammar and some syntax in this too, right? But there's also an orthographic error because she didn't know the IGH to spell I. She heard the highest. That sliding sound of the vowel she used as a Y. So we've got some of both. So this is what I like to look at. Remember when I said connected speech or connected writing, spelling's the window to their soul? When I look at here, I can see, look, her phonology is intact. I don't need to spend any instructional time trying to strengthen those neural pathways in the phonological processor. I need to spend my time mostly on building some phonics, weaving in some morphology. So that's what my interventions would look like for her. So some tier 2 spelling interventions. I loved this graphic because it talks about all the components we need to have to spell. With our time, I want to leave time for Q&A, so I'm not going to talk about those. But I do want to get into Aries phases of word recognition development. So we know this for decoding, that there are different phases of students' reading development. There's also a way that we can look at that for our spelling too. So if kids are just learning some sound spelling and they have a couple of connections and they're in like 3rd grade, well, I want them to be spelling multisyllabic words, but if they don't have the literacy knowledge to do that, how am I going to expect them to be spelling words that they aren't yet decoding? Spelling word structures that they're not developmentally ready for. Remember, reading and decoding comes first and then spelling. So no, they're not going to spell grade level words because they're not decoding grade level words. So I was thinking about this, like, how do we structure this? So I took Aries phases, thinking also about my POM analysis, and tried to combine these. Came up with this. This is a draft, and it's not complete, but you'll see, I'll click on this and show you in a second, but I've put down Aries phases here, what that spelling might look like when you're in that Aries phase. So pre-alphabetic, you got nothing really. Partial alphabetic, if I'm trying to spell the word black, maybe I have the beginning, maybe I have an end, maybe I have a voicing error. I don't have a whole lot. My full alphabetic, I've got the sounds, but I don't have all my phonics. And my consolidated alphabetic, I'm spelling the way I should be. But let's say I take my POM and I go through and say, I'm seeing a lot of phonological errors, and my student is in the full alphabetic phase. These would be activities that you could target to build the phonology that's also developmentally appropriate with their word reading development. And so when this is finished, you will be able to click on that particular skill that you want to work on and be taken to a Google folder with activities that you can print and do. I'm going to show it to you in a second. So you can see I have not gotten them all done. I've gotten a few, but the same thing goes for orthography. So the student, she's probably down here. She had so many errors. I'm going to start working in here with her and then move down here once she's gotten that. If there's all morphology, I can find what I need to do here and get some work there. Remember, these are tier 2 interventions. So this isn't the intensive tier 3. This is more than what they're getting in core. It's kind of that in between. So let me show you this. I'm going to click on this and take us, Leslie, you'll have to tell me if it actually goes to the right spot. Can you see my Google Drive?
Nope.
Okay, let me unshare and then reshare.
Yeah, if you're sharing just PowerPoint or Google Slides, you'll have to drag it over.
Drag it over.
Or stop sharing and reshare.
Okay, let's see here. Man. And there we go. Okay, stopped. Okay, can you see it now?
No.
Nope.
You're not sharing. I can only see you.
Guys.
I'm going to remove the spotlight so you can also see us a little bit. Okay.
Does that work?
There, yes, now we can see.
Yay. Okay, so this is the CKK. So if you clicked on that, this is where you would get. Here's a blank template. This is a full page of something that's in the activity if you want a full page. And then this is a template for the worksheet for students. So if you want to make your own using the template, you can fill it in. The student, can you see the full page?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Okay, great. So this is what you would give the student. I'll show you the teacher version in a second. there's some activities here. Let's go back to the teacher because it has the answers. Okay, so actually the student one needs the word bank. So these are all CKK words. And we're going to do a sort first to just kind of get familiar with the contrast. And so I want them to look at them and say, what's going on here? And I'm going to draw their attention to the end of the word. So then I've got words that end with CK, words that end with K, with the K sound. We're going to do some talking about that. But then we're going to do some mapping. And so they have blank sheets. They're going to finger stretch the word cheek, ch, e, k, 3 sounds, 3 check marks. I put the check marks in at this point because then working memory doesn't have to remember how many sounds or how many boxes. And if I'm doing this with them, they need that scaffold. Eventually we'll pull it away. So then what's the first sound? Ch. They're going to write down what they think spells that sound. Again, this is going to give you insight into what they have and what they don't have. And we'll do that for each sound. And then I like to have them write it like a real word all together, the correct spelling. This is my teaching point. So if they spelled CK here, then I can talk to them about the phonics rule. Hey, here's how this plays out. When the word has 2 vowel letters or more, I use K. If it's a 1-letter vowel, I use CK. And we practice that. Some words to practice. Then we're going to do word chains. Word chains, be careful if you write your own that you make sure that you are changing one sound only. You might change a lot of letters, but one sound only. Look at stick, or look at stock to stoke. I've taken out a C and I've added an E, but I've only changed one sound. I went from ah to O. So just be very cautious of that when you're making your own, that you need to just change one sound. Otherwise, it's not a real word chain. I put some things over here. So like if they misspell the word, I can say, you wrote stock, stoke is our word. Or I can, if they wrote soak, I can say, check the second word sound in my word. See if you spelled it the same way I did. Stoke, stoke. You left out. So just some verbiage in case you need some guidance on that. And then some application. These are just sentence dictation. But when you proofread it, we're going to look first at the words with our pattern, and you're going to ask them, hey, why did you spell struck with a CK? You know what kids are going to do? Erase. I mean, just a K. Well, why did you spell it with a K? Erase CK. Why'd you spell it with a CK? My kids used to get so annoyed with me because I kept asking why. And I said, I'm going to ask you why until you give me an answer, whether it's right or wrong. And finally they learned, because I want them to verbalize it. They need to have that repetition. They need to verbalize that rule, and they need to start building that confidence in what they are spelling. So that's just kind of a quick what's going to be in there. Let me go back to my slides. Stop share. Get back to my slides. And then I'm going to wrap up, and we are going to talk about, we'll do your Q&As. I closed out my whole thing. I'm so sorry. Just give me a second. Okay.
Shelley, are you going to show the spelling list and how you give credit? You mentioned a little bit about it, like all the things that went right, but you didn't show the actual.
I will put that in that. No, I did not. So let me add that to my drive.
Can you just talk about how you do that?
Yeah,
briefly.
So, okay. So when we were talking about spelling, it's either right or wrong is how we've been spelling or been grading it. But if we think about the, like what's right in it, to give them some credit, we had students that were missing all of them. And so they were getting 0 out of 10 or 1 out of 10, which was really defeating. But when we looked at their spelling, they actually had a lot right. So teachers started giving them 2 points for each word, or half a point. 1 for the phonetic spelling, 1 for the dictionary spelling. So the phonetic spelling, if they spelled girl, G-U-R-L, old way would be that's wrong. But from my lens, I'm like, you heard all 3 sounds. you spelled all three sounds with reasonable spellings, because can be you are. There's no way to know which one it is unless you've memorized it, because that's what ER, IR, UR is all about. So I'm going to give you partial credit, and then I'm going to show you the correct spelling. So my teachers came up with a template, like a student worksheet that that has that grading piece in it. So I'll put that in the
I just
Google.
thought that was so brilliant, and coming from an assets-based perspective, that
Yeah.
kids don't have to be defeated then. They can go, okay, I did hear the sounds. I get credit for hearing the sounds. I just missed
Right.
one thing. So, I mean, there's lots of ways you could do it. You could have each letter be a point or half a point or something, and the ones they get right, they get some acknowledgement that you do know things. It's not that you know
Yeah.
zero.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's,
So
and
much
that
more
was just,
encouraging.
that was exactly it. It was like, there's so much, there's progress. And for
Yeah.
me as an interventionist, I would look at things like, okay, this is awesome. They've got all our phonology. Okay, I have less to do. We just
Yeah.
need to work on this. And to celebrate that, especially for kids who are struggling, they need to have some source of success, some pride. So just to wrap up, this QR code should take you to the Google folder with all those resources. Keep checking back. I'm going to be adding to it as I make more of those pieces. The matrix will be in there. It's probably not in its best form right now, but it will be, I promise. So ideally, you'll go to the matrix, figure out where they are, and click on the intervention you need, and then it'll take you to the folder. But just kind of remembering, like, reading happens first because you're just recognizing it, and spelling happens second, where you're having to produce that. So that developmental pace is important to think about, and really just analyzing those spelling errors, because again, spelling's a thinking process, not a memorization task. When you know what kind of errors they're making, you know what kind of instruction to give. That fifth grade student, if I had spent time doing phonemic awareness and those kinds of activities, that would have been a waste of instructional time, because her phonology was great. That's not where she needed. But I only knew that because I did the analysis of the spelling errors. So I see we've got like 9 minutes, and I don't know if you've got answers.
Oh yeah, there's a whole sheet full of questions.
Okay. I'm
All right.
gonna leave this up so that people can scan the code if they want it.
Okay. So, Kristen, should we tag team? I'll do one, then you do one.
Sounds good.
Okay. So the first one is, if there's a kindergartner that has speech difficulty, sometimes leaving off ends, as well as other areas, how can you best help with blending and segmenting words?
So if is it like a final consonant deletion, I think is what
That's what it sounds like. Yeah.
Like cup would be ka.
Uh-huh. In speech first.
Yeah. So you're going to want to talk to your SLP, but one of the things you can do is say, like, if we're doing the word cup, up, which is kind of advanced for kindergarten at this phase, and they say you could just say to them, you got those first two sounds. There's a final sound too. There are three sounds in cup.
And watch my mouth.
Watch my mouth.
Yeah.
And they may or may not be able to produce that. I had students that if I brought attention to it, they could do it. But I also had students with such severe speech issues, we had to get that cleaned up first.
Yeah.
But I worked on it receptively. And so I could do words with like 2 sounds and 3 sounds, and say, point to the number of sounds you hear. If I say at, how many sounds do you hear? 2. If I say mat, at, how many sounds do you hear? Because then you're still training that auditory discrimination piece, even if they can't produce it. So if they can't produce it at all, even with tactile cues or modeling or drawing attention to it, I do receptive just to get them started.
Okay, great. Kristen?
The next question is, what would you recommend for teaching when to use ER versus IR versus UR? The tricky one.
The R controlled.
The tricky trifecta.
Yeah, those ers or are pretty easy because there's only one spelling. The is tricky. And honestly, this does play into, like, you have to make that neural model and get it into your sight word vocabulary. As far as teaching the why, I mean, you could spend some time looking up etymology and see if there's a why for it.
Mhm.
I know that, the ER and IR can't follow a C if it's going to say cur. So if I want to say like concur with the C, I have to choose UR because C before an E or I will say S. There are a couple little things like that, but my gosh, that kind of gets in the weeds. And again, coming from an interventionist point of view, my time with them is this, and that's not the highest frequency issue I've got. So
Mhm.
word sorts,
Mhm.
practicing those, mapping those, like we're going to map ERs. But if you do that, I would also do some interleaving practice with it so that you have some forced forgetfulness. You have to make that decision of, after I've done word sorts, I've acquired that skill, let's build the accuracy with some interleaving practice so that I'm saying, like, I'm going to do ER, 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 IR, ER, ER,
Mhm.
IR. So they do have to retrieve that. But I get that question a lot. It's a really
Yeah.
hard one. And I don't have a
Yeah.
great
Practice and practice and practice and more practice.
map.
Yeah.
Practice.
We always say map, not memorize, map, not memorize.
There you go.
So this one, we're not going to get to every question, but so I'm picking one that I think is really popular in terms of people always asking this of us anyway, too. For encoding, what's your stance on printing versus cursive? This teacher says, I teach the OG approach and find dyslexics spell better and more easily when using cursive.
So my first instinct as an interventionist is do what works.
Yeah.
Um,
Right.
I know I've been learning about the writing rope and the simple view of writing, and just like Amy Syracusano, I think is how you say her name, does a lot with this, and she talks about print as you are learning the letter formation, and then transition to cursive. But it takes a lot of repetitions to build, like 1 to 2 years of handwriting instruction to master that. So I think I would generally start with print, because that's what they run across in text is print.
Mhm.
But if they are better at spelling in cursive, why would I make them print it?
Yeah. I like the no nonsense approach of do what works. Because I mean the end goal, what I love about structured literacy and so much of what you said here tonight is that we, like one of the points you made was don't waste time if phonology is not the problem. Don't waste time on that. I love that structured literacy is pinpoints exactly, you really can pinpoint where the student is struggling in a variety of ways, right? With both
Right.
reading and spelling. And I love that about it because we don't, time is limited and we can be efficient with our instruction. And I just think it's so brilliant to just, let's put our energy and our time where a kid needs it most.
Right. Our instructional time, especially small group time, is so expensive.
Yeah, it's precious.
It's at what cost? And so when you are doing small group, tier 2 supporting, especially, you got to pick the highest leverage thing that's going to make the biggest difference for that kid.
Mhm. Exactly. All right, one more.
Okay.
One more. Here we go. Can the word study process that you follow work with any spelling program, such as one from a basal, or the teacher asked, should we seek out others, such as something structured or 95% group or a different scope and sequence?
Yeah. Any structured literacy program should be fine with it. It might be different. The scope and sequence might be a little bit different, but your basal is not going to follow that.
No.
Because the old day, I mean, how we used to do it is there was just this kind of random list of
Words.
Yeah. And that's like, we have journeys in our district, and that's how our word lists were before this. So when we adopted 95% for our core phonics, we followed that scope and sequence when I wrote that. So you could use it. You could still have your basal if you don't have structured literacy in your district yet. You could still follow this scope and sequence for spelling, for word study. It just won't I mean, your core is not going to really support it because you don't have it in your phonics lessons and
Yeah.
interventions as well.
It's not
And
application as much as it would be if you were teaching the pattern and then reading it in
Right.
decodable text and then practicing with words and doing your dictation.
Reading it in your
work study.
reading.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, it just makes so
Yeah.
much sense.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, this was awesome. Thank you so much. We
welcome.
appreciate you staying up late for us and sharing your knowledge with us.
Been
This is
so fun.
wonderful. So thank you again for being here, and we'll for sure follow up with your handouts and all the resources you shared. Thank you for those, and we'll keep an eye on the work that you're doing because I know you're working on lots of good stuff.
Yeah. And if you had a question that didn't get asked and you want me to answer it, just email it, or, that's fine. We'll figure it out.
We
Okay.
captured all those questions in a document, so we'll share that with you. And then if you want to plop some answers in there, we'll send out some follow-up resources to everyone. There were several questions about a certificate of participation, so we'll make sure that if you were here tonight or if you registered, you'll get that stuff in an email. So sit tight and we'll send you everything that you need. Thank you, Dr. Blackwell, so much.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
Yay. All right, everyone. Our next event is on the screen coming in October toward the end of the month. Join us with Megan Potente from Decoding Dyslexia California. She's going to tell us about the new California Universal Screening Law. So hope to see you there.
Yeah. All right. Take care, everyone. Thanks for being here. We'll see you next time.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great night.
You too.